Armenia is now the latest country to join several other European nations in recognizing Palestine as an independent state. Armenia's foreign ministry reaffirmed its support for a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and its commitment to international law, while also condemning Israel's military actions in Gaza. But the response from Israel has been harsh and swift. Israel's foreign ministry summoned the Armenian ambassador in Tel Aviv, who received, according to a statement, a harsh reprimand conversation. Israeli officials also warned that Armenia's recognition would have a negative effect on relations. Armenia's diplomatic support to Palestine comes after the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution last month which recommended Palestine's admission as a full UN member. Palestine and Turkiye welcomed Yerevan's decision, encouraging more countries to follow suit. And last week, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, in a rare phone call, reiterated their commitment to normalising relations without preconditions. Their rapprochement comes as Gaza's humanitarian crisis worsens and Israel becomes increasingly isolated from Europe and the world. And for more on Armenia's recognition of Palestine, joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Eugene Chavsovsky. He's a senior director at New Lines Institute. And from Istanbul, Zuhal Mert Uzuner, a professor at Marmara University. A warm welcome to you both, and thanks for joining me on Straight Talk. So, Eugene, Armenia has become the 9th country since April to recognize State of Palestine as a direct response to the war on Gaza. So the question is, how significant is this decision?
Yes, well, I think it's significant in that it shows the growing pressure that's happening on Israel in light of the war in Gaza. As you mentioned, there's been several countries, including several European countries, that have increased their recognition of Palestine as a result of this war. I think on the ground and in a functional way, it's not going to change much, but it does go to show that growing pressure, as well as the intersectionality of this conflict, along with other hotspots and conflicts in Eurasia, including Armenia's relationship with Azerbaijan, with Israel, and several other countries in the region.
So, Zuhal, how will these latest recognitions by various countries help to achieve a two-state solution? I mean, could that contribute the preserving of the two-state solution, which faces numerous challenges?
Actually, since the beginning of these recognitions, that was the most important side of these recognitions, because all these recognizing states are trying to put pressure over, especially Israel's the approach to keep itself away from any kind of just and foreseeable peaceful resolution in the region. So at the end, both sides shall come to the table to negotiate, and as a part of this, the lasting peace project, recognition of Palestinian Authority is very important. That's why these recognitions, continuing trend of recognitions, are very significant for any foreseeable settlement in the region.
So it was no secret, Eugene, Israel was furious over Yerevan's decision and immediately summoned its ambassador. So where do relations between the two countries stand now, considering they have already been complicated by Israel's close security ties with Azerbaijan?
Right. We're definitely at a low point right now. I will say, though, that there's been ups and downs in the relationship between Armenia and Israel. I believe just a few years ago, Armenia had recalled its ambassador from Israel due to Azerbaijan's Israel's support for Azerbaijan militarily in the war over Nagorno-Karabakh. But then that that ambassador was restored, or at least those diplomatic relations were restored. So I think that certainly right now is a pressure point. I mean, not only between Armenia and Israel, but a lot of Israel's partners and allies and other countries. I don't expect that to be a monumental shift, but certainly that's the trend right now that we're seeing.
So, Zuhal, Turkey has also welcomed Yerevan's decision. Do you think this latest move could help prop up normalization efforts between the two countries?
It is very obvious that this existing government and the prime minister in Armenia has an important, let's say, the initiative to progress about the regional settlements in regional disputes. So this development is also an important step explained by, again, prime minister as a part of this lasting peace in the region. So this perspective shows that, yes, especially for Turkish-Armenian relations, this can be an important contributor, but what else will be done in bilateral relations shall be followed very carefully.
So, Eugene, how do you think Yerevan's decision resonated among Western powers, especially in France? And do you think there will be some impact on France-Armenia military cooperation moving forward?
Well, I think that right now Armenia is undergoing a pretty significant shift in its foreign policy, of which this is only one small part. So we've seen, because of the war in Nagorno-Karabakh, that Armenia is essentially trying to shift its strategic ties away from Russia towards the West, especially European countries like France. And this is causing some ripple effects, I think. I think in response to this specific act, I don't see this having a major change. This is more of a strategic and structural realignment, if you will. We've seen France only increase military ties with Armenia. That certainly placed some pressure on Armenia's ties with Russia. But Yerevan has proven that it's going to continue with that, even as it's undergoing a attempted normalization, if you will, or at least a diplomatic agreement with Azerbaijan, with Turkey as well. So all of this is extremely interconnected, and I don't think that this move is going to fundamentally shift those ties with France.
So, Zuhal, French President Emmanuel Macron has recently said he's completely ready to recognize Palestine as a state, but he's also said this recognition must come at a useful time. What did he mean by a useful time?
Actually, this usefulness is related with what kind of contribution that recognition will create. As I mentioned before about the recognition of the Palestinian state by Armenia, all these recognizing actors are considering this recognition can be a kind of influential factor to push both sides to create a kind of peace negotiation table. So from French perspective, maybe it's not the right timing. Especially Israeli worries and reactions are depending on this timing also, because according to so many the experts from the Israeli side, these recognitions can be done, but not right now because it's not the right time according to them. So from that perspective, this approach of France can be considered like still trying to keep these bonds with Israeli forces closer and being a little bit careful about further steps, but they are obviously under pressure of this existing violence deriving from Israeli forces.
So, Eugene, as we all know, Armenia's decision follows many European countries like Spain, Ireland, and Slovenia for recognizing Palestine. So, is Armenia's decision following this shift, or is it more about Armenia's own interests?
I think it's a little bit of both. Certainly, Armenia has, as I mentioned before, trying to realign or at least expand its ties with the West, with Europe. But Armenia also has its own reasons, some of the ones that we've already talked about in terms of its relationship with Azerbaijan and how Israel was a major supporter there. Also, I think it's worth noting that the civilian toll of the conflict in Gaza, this is something that Armenia has experienced itself in a way in terms of the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh. So I think it's, there's a lot of different motivations here that's shaping Armenia's move on the recognition of Palestine.
So, Zuhal, the Armenian diaspora has also directly confronted Israel's controversial settler policies, especially in the occupied East Jerusalem, where more than 1,000 Armenians live in the city's old quarters. So could the recognition spark tensions there?
When we look at the reactions coming from Armenia and the Armenian society generally, we can see that this tendency cannot be shared by some groups. It is obvious, but actually, when we look at the importance of this recognition, it's coming from the state authority. That's why it is considered critical. Yes, most probably, in recognition cannot be shared by all the circles around the Armenian authorities. But what is critical here is the recognition of official authority. So from that perspective, I think this recognition cannot be undermined by looking at other reactions and, let's say, the negative considerations.
So, Eugene, how do you think the growing isolation of Israel will play out in the short term?
Well, certainly there's a lot of pressure right now, as we've already talked about, not only from countries like Armenia, the Europeans, but even the U.S. In order for Israel to essentially come to the negotiating table, stop the war, or at least have a ceasefire. And I think we're going to see that pressure rise, at least for the next few months leading up to the U.S. Presidential elections. So I think this is something that the Biden administration and many other countries are trying to do to get this war to an end.
So, and last question, Zuhal, how do you think this Armenian recognition of Palestine state was received in the Muslim world?
Maybe it is important to underline that what's happening in Palestine is a humanitarian issue right now. Mm-hmm. So from that perspective, not only in the Muslim world, generally in the international community, there is a sensitivity. And for me, it is important because we are discussing about the value-based international order. So from that perspective, I think it must be welcomed. And from the Muslim world, it is also important to see that it's not about civilizational thing. It's about international community, international normative framework for a better, peaceful and ordered atmosphere for all of us.
All right, Zuhal and Eugene, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.